I'd like to call to order Wednesday, August 19th, 2026 special workshop. Topic is annexation. Hand it over to Community Development Director Scott Woodford to walk us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good to see you, council members. Happy to be here and look forward to another discussion on annexation. We've held several workshops already. I think we're making some progress. We've also been involving the Planning Commission and our legal staff, as well as the rest of our city staff that will have some input on this, as well as some of the affordable housing providers in the community, and also developers who might implement this ordinance someday to get their feedback on things. So it's taken some time, but I think it's been a good discussion so far, and hoping to move it forward a little farther today and maybe get some further resolution on some of the issues that have generated the most conversation so far, specifically the housing requirements. So I thought we'd focus on those, and we can always also follow up and circle back to any of the other provisions that maybe don't get as much attention, just to see if there's any questions or concerns there. And so the hope is eventually we can get something that is adoption ready. It doesn't have to be 100% polished, but it can be something that could move into the next phase and get the value of some of the public input to that process. And the Planning Commission obviously serving a role in this process, so you can get their input and see what shape it's in by the time it gets to council. And obviously council has the ability to reshape it if they need to, or make some amendments, or take all that input that has been received into consideration. So just a little bit of background quickly for the council and maybe any members of the public to understand better where we are. The Sisters UGB amendment application is still currently under review locally. After hopeful adoption locally by the City of Sisters and Deschutes County, we go on to the state and for acknowledgement by the state. And once that happens, then our UGB is official and created, and that means that we can start entertaining petitions for annexation, and property owners can start creating petitions for annexation. And so we obviously want to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row and all of our requirements the way we want them before we open up the door for consideration to that. And that's what we've been working on. The reason why we're looking at it is our existing annexation ordinance really is outdated and doesn't really provide the detail and requirements in terms of review criteria, submittal requirements. It doesn't really detail the process that someone would go through to request annexation. So it doesn't really meet our needs. As mentioned, we've been workshopping the updates to the ordinance with both the Planning Commission and the Council. I think this is the 6th workshop we've held with the Council, so if it seems familiar, it is. We've been talking about this a lot, and for good reason. But also bringing the Planning Commission up to speed on this, as they haven't had the advantage of many workshops, but recently held a workshop with them several weeks ago where we were able to really dive into the details, and I think they're learning quickly and getting up to speed quickly on this. And like I mentioned, we also have, as we've created drafts of this ordinance, have made sure that as we do, that it's passing legal muster. It's also involving some of our other staff, Public Works, as well as bringing in the city engineer to get their perspective on these requirements. And then as council has directed staff early on, was to reach out to those entities that would be actually implementing some of the provisions of this ordinance, specifically the affordable housing component, to get their feedback and suggestions, and we've done that several times. We held a workshop with them, with council at one time, and got their feedback. And we've also since had a meeting with them internally just to kind of dive into their comments more deeply and to understand where the areas of concern are, but also try to solicit some potential solutions, knowing what the city's goals, what the council's goals are, what those overarching goals are, to work, to find out where those areas of concern are and to see what kinds of solutions would be workable to get to where the community wants to go. And so that process has been very valuable to the staff and hopefully valuable to the council as well. And then eventually this is heading all towards a proposed amendment to the code, which will require public hearings with the Planning Commission and council for adoption. The hope is to get that done prior to the end of the year, when we hope that we will have our adoption of our UGB. So we don't want to wait till then, but the clock is ticking, so that's why we're moving forward with these discussions.
Scott, for the benefit of those in the room and also online, our last annexation policy, the one that's currently in effect, was implemented approximately, when was that created?
Good question.
Rough idea.
I would say that it probably predated the last annexation that the city considered, which was about 2014 or 13, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So at least part of that.
Okay. So it's safe to say that it represents thinking of 10 to 15 years ago?
I think that's safe to say.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, some of the things that we've done since the last council workshop was we did hold that August 6th Planning Commission workshop and had a good meeting there. They focused, like the council has, more on the affordable housing piece. They thought that some of the thoughts were that it is a challenge to address all the goals that we need to. Some thought that it was a little cumbersome the way it's written currently. I think many of us agree that it still needs some work. There was some thought about they like the alternative plan option, that if something doesn't work for an entity, that they could propose something different that would still be in the best interest of the community as determined by the council. They felt that this was not set in stone, that we try to take our best stab at this, and if we see that there's issues, we can always come back with amendments to it. If it's not working for some reason, similar to some of our other complex code amendments, we can always tweak them later. Obviously, we want to get it the best that we can the first time. And then we also held our internal meeting with what I'm calling the Affordable Housing Working Group, that consists of Habitat for Humanity, Sisters Habitat for Humanity, Northwest Housing Alternatives, Housing Works, Build LLC, which is an entity assisting with the Sisters Woodlands development, and then Brooks Resources, a regional development company that has a lot of experience in master plan communities. So I want to just extend a big thank you out to them. They appreciate us reaching out to those folks as well, because they're not used to that, having communities reach out to ask them their opinion on things. So I think it's been a good process so far and helpful information. And as we go along today, we'll weave in some of the comments that they had and some of the solutions. So as I mentioned, focus on the affordable housing requirements, because I think that's the area of most discussion so far. And then don't want to discount or not give time to other parts of the ordinance that we might want to address, and then review next steps. So any questions on the agenda or the format today? Does that work? Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is in a order that touches on more of the other parts of the ordinance first. So I want to skip ahead to the housing requirements first. So I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for that. And then we'll circle back to the other provisions.
A quick question on the earlier provisions. that you skip through. And I'm fine, I'm fine with that. But I'm guessing in reading that through that a lot of that is state boilerplate and those sorts of things. There's not as much tweaking in that area as there might be down in the section that we're going to be speaking about. Is that an accurate assumption on my
There's
part?
probably at least 50% of it is probably like.
Was what I was thinking, yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Gary, are you referring to the section maybe 4.10.400?
I'm referring to the sections in 4.10 that we're not discussing at this point in time, which is the annexation, the 700. If you, there's,
The state boilerplate.
I mean, there's a lot of language that's in there, in 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 that is, you know, sort of legal procedure and process. And I just was kind of questioning how much of that is new to us, versus what we currently do, and how much of it is actually required by the state or from our existing language that we probably don't need to edit or wordsmith that much, and so we can focus on the real critical issues at hand, I think, which is the aspects of annexation that are closest to me anyway, and that is how we're going to handle the type of housing types and address the needs of our diverse community in terms of making sure we have all housing types represented.
Okay.
I don't know if I said that well, but it's just.
Well, there was a piece in the earlier parts that I think we had confusion with. We don't need to dive in right now, but the piece about the electors and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
if we have time at the end, maybe could we talk about that?
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so let's jump into the housing requirements. As currently written, it says that annexations involving land zoned or to be zoned shall meet the following affordable and workforce housing requirements unless a grant of land in lieu is made under or an alternative plan is approved by council. And so it says annexation shall provide a total of 25% of the total residential units as a combination of affordable and workforce housing units. And then it goes further on to say that of that 25% total, a mix of units in each area median income category below shall be provided and in accordance with the percentages of each category below. So the 25% requirement is in line with the percentage that I think that I've heard from council for a while as kind of a target for the percentage that we want to see out there for affordable units. And then the second part of it is, okay, we're asking for these affordable units. That is a broad category, that's a broad definition, and if you add workforce into it, it's even broader. What type of units do we want and do we need? And so that table down below is an attempt to categorize what the need is. And those numbers came from our housing plan. They were also represented, I believe, in our housing needs analysis. And we also compared them to the state's numbers that they provided as part of updated housing, their regional housing needs analysis that they've done. So we kind of compared them back and forth to try to see if any numbers were out of whack, but they all seem to align pretty closely to these percentages. So 20% of 30% AMI or less, 20% of 31 to 50% of the AMI, and so on and so forth. And then the kind of units that they should be, the lower end of that AMI typically being rental units, and then the upper end being more a mix or more ownership units. The feedback that we received was, number one, that the 25% requirement was too high, and it came more from the market rate developers. The nonprofit developers didn't weigh in on that as much. They just didn't weigh in on that number. And then the other issue was that these numbers contemplate such a diversity of different types of units that would require a multitude of different funding sources, and would almost be impossible for any one developer to pull off. And so those were two problems. They recommended that we either that we get rid of the table and make it more general, or find some other solution. And so that's something that first thing I wanted to kind of raise with the council today is how we want to handle this. One of the solutions that came up during the working group was, and I think a solution that the market rate developers would probably relish, and probably this is the way it would work anyway, is they have an affordable housing requirement. They're not going to do the affordable housing themselves. That's not their forte. They would probably be seeking out a second entity or a nonprofit developer such as Habitat or NHA to build the affordable housing. So one of the suggestions was that maybe a deed of land would be a better way to go about this, so that it frees up the developer from having to try to provide and get funding for all these different categories. They could basically just provide the utilities, stub the utilities and the roads to a piece of ground of sufficient size, and deed it to either the city or to a nonprofit developer, and then they can go out and get their funding. They can focus and tailor it more to the true needs in the community, at the time, whether and what the available funding is, so that we don't have to pinpoint all this at the time of annexation. We can just kick the can down the road. Let's get the land and bank the land and decide as a community. The city can either decide, the city's obviously not going to develop property, but could put out an RFP, similar to how we handled the NHA development, the Trinity Place apartments, where we had the funding. We didn't necessarily have a developer. We found a potential piece of land. We partnered. We were able to put the developer in contact with the landowner, and then they ran with it. We, as a city, kind of dictated what AMI range we wanted it to meet, and how many units. So this is something that we wanted to have the council discuss today as a potential solution to the burdensome aspect of this, the difficulty in implementing it, and the feedback we've received so far. One other aspect that is important that we talked about was phasing. Right now we have a provision in the draft ordinance that requires that the affordable units be provided at a certain time frame relative to the market rate units. And some of the feedback that we've gotten there is that because of the uncertainty of funding from the state, from the federal government, and sometimes the timeline that it takes to secure that, we've gotten a first-hand look at that with NHA trying to develop the Trinity Place apartments. How you think you have a funding source, and that funding source might go away for a while, so you have to go to a plan B. And so they're concerned that they would be holding up the market rate development. What this would potentially do, I think that the phasing still is pertinent, because we don't want, if they go the deed of land route, we don't want that deed of land occurring at the very end of the project. So there were some solutions thrown out that we can review in terms of what type of phasing would work for the deeding of the land that we want to discuss with you all. So granted, these concepts have not been, we just had the meeting with this working group last week. I was on vacation for a couple of days. These are more concepts at this point and not code language. But we wanted to see if the council felt that these concepts had some merit to them, and then we can continue to wordsmith them and work on the language. But essentially with the potential revision, the options for meeting the affordable housing requirements would still be if you had a developer that wanted to do the development themselves, they could still be required the 25%. We wouldn't necessarily mandate what income categories that they do, other than just making sure that it's, say, 120% of AMI or less. We could limit it, or we could even further reduce it down to 80 or 60%. It doesn't sound like from our feedback that many market rate developers are going to be doing the affordable housing on their own. So that would be an option that we probably wouldn't see happen very often. Or that we would give them this option of the granting of land in lieu that they provided to the city or the nonprofit housing developer. And like I said, we can work on tailoring the AMI targets to more closely meet the need, and potentially we could even exceed that 25% requirement with some creative design and the proper funding. And then we'd still keep the alternative plan format in place if there, if there is a alternative way of going about this that we haven't heard of or we aren't contemplating right now, that could be presented to council, that is in the public interest still. Maybe it's a combination of some affordable housing, or some workforce housing, or some land. Maybe there's some land inside the community, that a developer has access to that could be provided, or payment of a fee in lieu. Some combination of that. There probably is some combination that would be in the public interest that we can't possibly contemplate at this point that could be proposed. So I'm going to stop there and just get a little feedback from you and see if you have any questions.
Yeah, a lot of feedback, but good.
Yeah.
I wanted to start by saying I think that engaging the developers was really helpful, because reading through their feedback caused me to look at things from a lot of different perspectives and really understand a bigger picture than just trying to throw out a percentage like that. I feel like some of the successes we've seen with like higher percentages have been very, they've been often part of the special UGB amendments that have been done in Bend. And I'm not against the percentages, but I think we have to look at the whole picture, and we've been more educated through this process. I'm definitely following. I have a question and then want to respond to the chart that talks about the different AMIs and the percentage units, and so that all comes from like state data, etc., and things that are given to us. Is that correct?
It's kind of a combination. It's like I said, some of it came from the housing plan that we had out, that was prepared about 3 or 4 years ago, that utilized demographic information in the community. We had a sub-consultant working on that who was more of an economist, and they were able to identify what the needs were based on the median income of the community, what the age of the population, what the size of the households were, things like that they were able to correlate all that into these recommendations. And it's very interesting that it's been very similar across several different sources of information. So that's where that information came from.
So I want clarity for myself, is that there's not a mandate from anywhere that we have to hit these. And I'm not saying let's go away from them. It's not a state mandate that we have to make sure we hit all of these numbers.
It's not a mandate now. It's my understanding that the state is moving into that direction with the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, that is more of a regional look at housing, the amount of housing that we need, and actually starts to get into percentages of affordable housing in different levels. So we're not at this point required, but that's the way the state's moving.
But I'm not saying throw it away as much as like, oh, if it was 22% here instead of 20, it's, you know, if we're working in a good range, like, anyway. Sorry, I have a few other things to say. I don't like having this chart in the annexation policy myself. I feel like we need to keep it somewhere and have, I feel like somewhere we may need to have a reference that we pass along to the next councils or as a policy. I don't know where it belongs, but we don't want to lose track of this, but I don't feel like one project is, I agree, like it's not going to be able to hit all these numbers. I can easily see how complicated that would become. So that's, again, that's just my opinion. I saw the feedback on the dispersing of the affordable units, and you know, we talked about it last time, and I see the complication in that too. I think what we're trying to get away from is having all affordable units clustered in one area. But the prescriptiveness, if that's a word or not, of separating detached units, I see that becoming very complicated as well. So that feels like something that would have to have like a general, like in general, we don't want them all clumped, but if it just makes more sense because of how land lays out or something to have 2 here and then 3 here, again, my opinion that this is overly prescriptive. Though I understand the logic behind it. The phasing piece, I agree, is kind of also difficult, and I do like the idea of the deeding of the land. In some way, offering that as an option so that there is already an agreement in place that affordable housing will be happening, but learning what we have from some of these projects about the funding difficulties. I think we need to be respectful of that. So I'll just go ahead and stop there for now.
Mayor Cheryl, anything you want to ask or share right now?
Yes. Thank you. So I concur with Councillor McDougall that this matrix and requirement of percentages is, I think, unreasonable to set that expectation. And what we'll find is that most developers will just default to the alternate plan because they can't meet this. So what's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is for us to have at least some kind of idea or wish list or basis to make sure we do meet our affordable housing need. With that said, and even if we put this on the side for reference, I think these percentages are not aligned with the housing needs that I saw in our housing plan update, which I gave everybody a copy here. These are much higher in some categories and much lower in others. So I would want to just suggest if we were going to have a reference matrix, as Councillor McDougall had suggested, and I agree with that we align better with our housing plan here, which actually shows very different numbers. And I like the, we had the deed of land, which I see is already kind of in this draft. I think that's a great option. And I do think that that's going to be the majority of what we're going to see, land deeded to Habitat, for example. But I'm assuming that if a developer comes forward with their annexation plan and says, I'm going to be deeding this land, it's going to be upfront that we're going to be reviewing that as part of the annexation package. So we'll understand upfront, it's not going to be later on down the line of development. And I just want to make sure that that is part of the plan up front, so we can see when they plan on deeding that, who they're going to deed it to, and then know what that partner is planning to do with it. I think that's important too. And then what was the third one, the phasing? And I can understand the concerns they raised around the phasing.
So I didn't get to finish my complete
Okay.
presentations. I was going to touch on that. And just wanted to touch on a few of the items that I think you guys might find relevant in your comments.
Yeah.
As Councilor McDougall mentioned, there were some concerns with the clustering. They are aware of the purpose of the goal of trying to make sure that not all the units are clustered in one location, but they felt that the prescriptive nature of this would be difficult to meet, and probably would come up with alternative plans anyway. It's interesting, they felt that the location of them is less important than the design of the buildings and how they look and how they integrate into the community. Brooks Resources has developed in Northwest Crossing, and they relayed the story of, there's several affordable housing multifamily development projects in Northwest Crossing. And I bet you'd have to be hard pressed to kind of identify where they are and what that they do serve that.
Woodlands is another example as well, where there's
Yes.
integrated housing in throughout. And my understanding is there actually has been more interest in about families coming in and wanting to purchase some of the houses that are of the size that were land deeded to Habitat, as opposed to some of the larger facilities, which shows that even within the higher income levels, we have some interest in different sorts of property sizes. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought it was I didn't want to lose that thought.
Yeah. So to that point, their recommendation was to address that concern in a different way. We also talked about, by nature, of assuming that we're not going to just get a 318-acre master plan. I don't think we're going to. We're going to have multiple different master plan developments. And if each one is required to deed some land within that, just by nature of multiple master plans separated geographically throughout the UGB, that is going to naturally result in some of the housing being spread out as well. So that's something that I wanted to get your feedback on. And then one of the recommendations for phasing was, instead of tying it to issuance of the way it's written right now is that building permits shall be issued for at least 50% of the affordable units prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the last of the first 50% of market rate units, so that gives them time. As a developer, they want to get some revenue coming in before they have to commit to providing or start to build affordable units. That's why we don't require them with the initial phase. I think it's only fair to let them get a little bit of revenue coming in before we require things like that. And then the second part of this is that certificates of occupancy shall be issued for the final 50% of the affordable units prior to the issuance of a building permit for the final 10% of the market units. That's just to make sure that not only do you start those affordable units, but that you get some of them complete before you're at the tail end of the market units. Again, the concern here is tying affordable units to market rate units, and with the potential delays in funding sources, it could result in a situation where the market rate developer can't go forward any farther with their market rate development until the affordable units get started. And so one of the solutions that they offered up was that this applies to if somebody's deeding land, is that the land be provided prior to the final plat of the completion of the final plat for the first half of all the phases of the development. So if it has 6 phases, by phase 3 they would have to provide the land, basically deed the land over to the city or a nonprofit housing developer. there was some talk about also being under contract to sell the land, and proof of that contract potentially could be proof that that was going to occur and that that would suffice. And so that basically frees up the market rate developer and decouples those two goals. So
I think it's
those-
more flexible. When I think about them deeding land to Habitat, again, I'm just using that example because it's easy to use it. Their Habitat then is going to be on a different schedule, a different funding schedule, and what other requirements they might have. So to try to align the developer's market rate schedule with the affordable housing may have some challenges, so I think some flexibility needs to be there. And I agree with this proposed coding.
May I interject on that a little?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt your train of
No,
thought.
I'm
so,
done.
yeah. I think it's a broader topic than that. I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, we're talking master planning. I'm a developer, I'm master planning 35, 40 acres of land that I've acquired. I'm gonna know, when I start master planning that, where I think those parts of the property are going to be that I would dedicate towards workforce and affordable housing. So why would we want to wait until the final plat of the first half is done in order to put that land into the lieu of category, which means the city has it or some other developer has it to do that work? That should be part of the master planning process, in my opinion, because that's when we decide what's going to go where, how the lots are going to be laid out, and those things. So waiting until the first half of all phases of the development are going before we decide where the affordable housing or workforce housing properties might be within that footprint seems to be, in my mind, late. I mean, that should be right up front in the planning process so that the developers that may be stepping in, whether it's Habitat or one of the other companies that are out there, know where the property is going to be, what size of properties are going to be, and they can start making their plans to provide the housing pieces. I think this just kicks the can too far down the road in terms of working for what I think is the most important thing in here, which is providing workforce housing in particular, and ensuring that we can have in this community the people we need to support the work of the community and the citizens who live here. So I don't have a problem with the concept. I have a problem with the timing.
Just a point of clarification, so I understand your comment. Are you more concerned about not identifying where it's going to be, or the fact that it might not be deeded until halfway through the phases? Because we will know with master planning.
Yeah.
There's one word in here I think I need some clarification on, is plat.
Yeah.
Like when is platting done in this process? Because this isn't, you don't mean building, construction, building permits, right? It's just platting.
Right.
So that would be, yeah.
So that, I mean,
That might address my concern.
yeah, I think I don't know the time frame, but it seems like it's way earlier than
It could
building
be
permits.
potentially done in, like, if you want to use Woodlands as the example, I think they have 8 phases, 7 or 8 phases, and they've platted in increments, phasing increments. So it's not all a very small, like a smaller portion is platted at each time. So, in that case, it would be like, the requirement would be before phase 4 is platted, you'd have to, so we know where the land is going to be. That's part of the master planning process. They'll
that's the key,
identify
yeah.
the location. The question, I guess, is just what the timing is, if council is okay with it being pushed to the latter, till the end of the first half of the phasing. The idea,
Wow.
the feedback from the development community is that, for them, ideally, it's good for them to be able to get some revenue coming in from the sales of some of the lots especially before they build something affordable. But if they are creating land that they are selling, ideally at a reduced rate to a nonprofit developer, or even providing it to them, I'm not sure what the exact arrangement would be, but that there's some offset for that, providing that housing, that they've had an ability to sell some lots, bring some revenue in before that occurs.
I think that when we're talking about plotting and deeding land to the city, I don't see this, if we're removing the onus from them of providing the types of housing that we know we need to have, and allowing them to build market rate, which is, I have no problem with that. That's what this is about. I think that when we start talking about deeding land to the city and assuming that the city's gonna buy that land, I think that there's two assumptions in there, one of which I'm uncomfortable with, is that we're gonna have dollars in the city to buy that land. I think we have to have some, there's no answer to this today.
Well, that's one of my questions, is there's no a clarification of,
Right.
you know, is there an understanding that this land is going to be transferred to the city or other nonprofit entities for free? Or is there going to be a cost attached? I think it's two different discussions.
I think so too, I really do. And I think that comes back to the previous slides where we were talking about what we expected to see percentage-wise, or what's on the sheet of paper that Councilor Pellerin has provided to us. You know, before I'm ready to throw out some numbers that other developers have said they can do in other parts of this town, I want to be sure that we're not going to be pushed into a corner where, well, here's the land, but nobody can afford the land or has the money to buy the land and be able to do it, and we just keep kicking the housing can down the road. And as I said before, I'm thinking that maybe we peel off what I call affordable housing, which is the 80% AMI and down, which requires federal money and also has difficulty getting, and start looking at the upper and middle income housing at the 120 to 150 AMI, and saying, we expect that this is something that you can probably do in your process and still make a profit on it. I mean, if the issue is how the problems with getting funding from the federal government to do these kinds of affordable housing properties, we know that's the case. I don't think that any of those funds that are coming from those locations are dealing with the upper income, the workforce housing types of properties that I think we're thinking about. And we have to peel those apart.
Yeah, Sarah had a comment.
So, couple things. My understanding is that just deeding in lieu would be free. And then later on is mentioned a contract, which would be like a sale. So I agree there's two possibilities. I can see, I don't have a vision of every situation out there, but there's another piece in here, and I can't remember which section, that says that the land that is needed also has to have infrastructure built up to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a quick, no cost, no work situation. So I think we need to be careful about just thinking that it could be done super quickly, always, because we don't know. I mean, there might be some, I don't know if there's more wording or anything, but it's not just a land thing. There's some work to be done even on that blank land.
Yeah, his example of Woodlands and the phasing is perfect, right? Because it's like, yeah, if there's land deeded in phase 6, that's great, but there won't be no infrastructure there until they get to phase 6. So I mean, these are all, really great points.
And with that in mind, maybe half is being too generous. I mean, our goal, the reality is we could do absolutely nothing, and we could annex the land in, and we could end up with a lot of wonderful, pretty developments where houses are not affordable for anybody other than people who have my income level or some other income level. As I've said many times in the past, the only reason I'm willing to bring land into the city is to see that we can support parts of our city that currently are unable to live here, that have to travel or live in the woods and those sorts of things. And other than that, I could care less about building more homes. So I'm going to have, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, that there are infrastructure costs and we have to lift that. But I'm thinking that half may be too generous. I mean, face it, the market rate developers are gonna try to give us the language that's the most beneficial to them that still tries to achieve what we want. I get that. It's called business. I'm gonna try to get the most beneficial thing for the community and the people in need with our community, and that may, to some degree, run a little contrary to what's up there on the screen. That doesn't mean there can't be a middle ground. But I'm not sure the middle ground is half if we indeed look at that. If we can allow half of the platting to be done, which means the streets and those sorts of things starting to go in, before we ever talk about where we're gonna be providing housing for individuals that need housing, that makes me extremely uncomfortable as an elected official. I
Scott,
don't expect everyone to agree with me, I'm just telling you where Gary's coming from.
Scott, when you were talking with builders and the idea of deeding the land to us or another organization, yeah, was there any other terminology in there where it was just an assumption that that would be a sale or that would be free? Because it, really, changes the conversation.
Yeah,
It does.
The subject did come up, especially with regard to when the entity potentially receiving the land is also the entity that might be approving your annexation.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly.
That gets a little more awkward for them, I think.
I wondered, was there any, as a builder, and everybody's saying, like, there's a lot of trouble with how it's written right now, a lot of hoops to jump through. And I just don't know why we're on the scale of like, look, I would rather give somebody else the land for free to not have to deal with it. Like, on that scale, from that end, or to, no, we still need to make some money off of this land, but maybe we'll sell it at a discount. Is there kind of a sense of on that scale of where they were at, or?
Jordan, you can weigh in because you were there as well. We didn't get quite deep dive into that level of detail. We were still kind of on the surface of talking about different concepts that might be agreeable to them. But certainly, if I was in their shoes, not having to take any of the risk of having to build and having to sell or rent, manage these units, I would think there'd be a lot of value to that. But I think we would have to have them speak for themselves.
It might depend on, you have multiple different pathways, right? So you've given them the option. You can build it. If you can't do that or don't want to do it, then you can deed it to a nonprofit or a for-profit affordable housing developer. If you don't want to do that, well, you can give it to the city, and the council would have the option of saying yes or no.
You use the word give.
Yeah, right. That's what I mean. Like, I think if you give them other pathways, I think there's nuance here of like the language and, like Scott said, hanging over this is a whole annexation agreement that has to be, negotiated. Scott, at the same time, that the council approves the annexation agreement, though, I think the council's also considering the master plan, right? Isn't that a requirement that it's compliant with the area plan and the master plan for that, right? So, as you're approving the annexation, you also have insights into the phasing of the development, where the proposed affordable housing, is going to be, right? Like, we were talking about your concerns about, the timing and right? And so at what phase is it going to be deeded? How the platting is going to work throughout that development cycle. So it's not like a sequential, like we're approving annexation, but we're not sure yet until the master plan comes in and where that's going to be. You'll have, more of the specifics at that same time.
Since you don't see the master planning process, that typically is something that goes through.
No, typically, as it's written now, you don't see that.
Right.
There's going to have to be some amendments to it because if you're going to be the body, the council's going to be the body that approves the annexation, that particular type of master plan would have to come in front of you as well because you.
It's good to know that actually is comforting, and even though I don't want the extra work. And not that I don't trust what you folks do, but I think there's a certain amount of education for us in this process, as well as trying to make it work. And I come back to something that I said a little earlier, and that is, we've talked about workforce housing at that 150 AMI level and that sort of a thing, and I'm really wondering if we peel that off of the, quote, chart, and we basically ask the developers, can you build to this price point by building smaller units and those sorts of things, kind of like what you've done at Woodlands, or up in Northwest Crossing, and we take that chunk out, so that when we talk affordable, my concern is that we use the word affordable housing, everybody thinks talking about 80% AMI and down. I mean, that's not necessarily this group, but that typically is what happens. Because that's the word we heard used all the time and everywhere on the TV and everything else. And, you know, we go after the federal grants and they have the restrictions and we have to do this and we have to do that. And you saw the struggles we had with Northwest Housing Alternatives to try to get a slightly higher AMI in there, but they still had to kind of tweak it so they could meet on paper a certain number. That says to me that the 150 to 120 sorts of AMI levels are going to be difficult to get, unless the state does something different, difficult to find funding for no matter what we do. And that may actually hurt us in the process of trying to do some of the housing for lower income areas. So do we speak to the development communities and say, you know, that 150 AMI level is actually fairly high. Is that something you can build towards? And see, we don't have an answer to that. I think if I were them and I looked at that chart and saw those numbers, especially the way all of us think about affordable housing, and not all of us, I think about affordable housing when I hear the term. I'm thinking 80% AMI and down, and that involves the federal government, and that involves grants, and that involves rules, and that involves all these other things that I don't want to have to deal with. I want to go out, dig a hole in the ground, put in a foundation, build a house, and sell it. So can the 150, 180, can the workforce housing piece somehow be handled by these market rate developers? I suspect they can. The profit margin will be lower, but I suspect that they could, because it's probably closer to the level that they're building at anyway, just smaller. I'm making guesses. I'm not doing it, but I think it's worth asking the question.
Well, I think it's a good point that you're bringing up. If we kind of go back to our workshop, and Clayton Crowhurst was talking about, he's never seen any workforce housing grants except what the city has provided, right? So there's a shortage on that. Plus, Missy in our April workshop meeting, our legal counsel, was sharing with us about the disappearing middle income housing. And she was saying that the idea there now is to not be addressing it based on income and AMI like that, but making it more of just market rate organically being addressed through cottage clusters,
Yes.
triplexes,
Yep.
or multifamily. So, I kind of am just chiming in there with what you're saying about the workforce housing being more market rate. We know the funding isn't there for it, unfortunately, and hopefully that can organically be resolved through the development of these more clustered.
It's worth an ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I appreciate you mentioning the middle income housing concept of it, because frankly, when we start talking in this town workforce housing, we're talking middle income and that sort of a thing and up. So I just think that maybe decoupling those two in our discussion in a way in terms of land grants and land in lieu and those sorts of things, because may make sense to ask the question.
That's good. I guess it's a good opportunity to kind of discuss this a little further.
Especially, what kind of made me think of this number down here?
There could be two schools of thought, you know,
Yeah.
like, are we actually going to require a percentage of 81 to 150, or to your point, are we going to lean on our efficiency measures and any other measures we might take as part of the code audit to reduce barriers to housing and provide more opportunities for that middle housing, you know, to the extent that we can provide those opportunities to make it easier to build those kinds of units, then it might happen more organically. So I guess I'd love to hear from the council as a whole. Like, should we lean towards doing it that way, kind of letting the market decide, or kind of create the conditions so that the market can run with it, or are we gonna? Or would you like to see more of a specific requirement or encouragement in the ordinance to hit that segment of the market as well?
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm catching up, an hour in here. Going back to what Councilor Pellerin, what you gave us today. And so I've followed along and read documents, et cetera, at the time, but I do not remember specific ones and what was in each one. So I've just skimmed through the numbers here in the Sisters Housing Plan update. So this is the most current set of percentages that has been produced by work at the city regarding what our needs would be. Okay, because I am looking at the numbers in the chart here and over, in the chart in the annexation agreement draft, and then the Sisters Housing Plan update. And yeah, I'm seeing, I appreciate this because I'm seeing some, like the above, above 80%, just for an example, in the annexation agreement draft would be 36%, and over here in the housing plan update would be potentially 66%. So that's a 30% difference in needs, which is kind of blowing my mind in the sense of that is a different picture. And so I would like a little.
Thank you for saying that so well, because I didn't. Yeah.
I think I need to think about that, and probably not resolve it all today. So, just saying.
I would add to that, this plan analysis that was done, so this is from the 2022 housing plan update. We now have Trinity Place going in, we have Larch Commons going in. These are numbers too that aren't here, that address more of that lower income area. So even more, we've got a higher need or stronger need potentially for the 120 and above. So I just want to make sure we align our needs with what we're saying here on the annexation if we're going to give percentage.
I think asking that committee again, sort of the question of this, can you produce at this kind of a level? If they say no, that answers the question. If they say, yeah, we really don't want to, that's a question. But I really think that when we decouple them, we're really talking two different funding sources in my mind. We're talking federal funding, state funding for the 80% AMI and down, and we're talking realistically market funding and maybe grants and stuff like that for the higher percentage. And when I talk to Kurt Schill and they can't get a teacher or they lose a principal because they can't find a place to live, and we keep talking about having an urgent care clinic here, and we know we can't staff it, that scares me. Because, I'm not saying we shouldn't be dealing with those other ones too, they're very important, but we have a whole chunk of our population that we're just assuming will just want to live here, and we'll figure out how to work it out, and that's not going real well right now. So I don't have an answer, but I'd like to hear what they have to say, because they definitely have some opinions on this, and I think they're valid.
I think what we certainly asked them that question. Some of the responses that we've received, and I think you would receive, is that, yeah, we could do it. What kind of incentives, what kind of carrots can you give us in return to deliver those units, such as density bonuses or some relief or assistance on SDCs, or, I think they mentioned the property tax issue. We brought up the property tax potential program.
Yeah, Merle, that we're looking at now. I think it goes back to talking about negotiating land, right? Remember, annexations are voluntary, right? This is purely a landowner developer petitions the city, right? So you're entering into an agreement that you're negotiating, and it would probably be easier to negotiate land and getting the type of housing you want if you also have the carrots and not just the requirement.
Well, I think we have to.
We'll sign an agreement if you do all this, right? It's like, well, I can do more, or I could do that. I could do the 120, housing, the middle housing, if there's, some carrots that go along with it. And is that SDC waivers for those units? Is that, density bonuses for other parts of the development? And I don't know if that fits into an annexation policy somewhere or not, of city might consider these things. It's also stuff that we might have to consider in our code to allow for some of those tools.
I just think that, as I looked at this at home, and I listened in that session online. Everybody kept using the word affordable, and it occurred to me somewhere, maybe in a dream or a nightmare, I don't know, that really we needed, affordable to me is those first three categories. That's what we've always used in when I've been around, and now we've added a new one, which is workforce housing and middle-income workforce housing, which is a term we haven't used as much, and we've kind of lumped it in with affordable. And I don't think, to me, workforce housing is necessarily, quote, affordable housing in the way my brain defines it.
So, Councilor Ross?
Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
I want to ask you a question. And you don't have to answer, of course, but, because I know, and not that other councilors haven't been behind it, I'm looking for just personal opinion, that you've been very much behind, like, having a set percentage, like a 25% or 30% of housing that's affordable. Would you then re-say that sentence, that the total of 25% workforce plus affordable as defined, capital W and capital A? So like I'm trying to take your lead of.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Of how we talk about affordable, but we've always said 25% affordable housing, but is the sentence really 25% affordable plus workforce? And that's the better sentence.
Yes.
I just
No,
wanted to
you said it very well. That's exactly when it came up there, I thought we need to add the word workforce and affordable housing and kind of make an and in there, because I think they're two different distinctively things. And when I looked at this sheet that you handed out versus what we had in there, and I realized, wow, we're looking at really 60% of our housing needs in that group. And I don't know how we do it, but it changed the way my brain was working on this whole thing, to be honest with you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think in the beginning, Scott, and everybody, you used a few words, I think flexibility. I think what I was seeing in some of these revisions and comments, I was really happy to see, because again, we know that there are developers who are going to, day one, want to hit the ground running. But again, this is a 20-year plan, and interest rates do this, and the economy does this, and incomes do this, and the desire of our community may fluctuate, and so I don't want to have anything so baked in, and our world changes in 3 years, and now we've just shot ourselves in the foot, and we're not building anything. So I kind of, like, I liked how you were saying that if there was like a deed transfer, then the entity, the city, whatever, can kind of decide and build what they feel is best for their population that they're working with. Because I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in the last week where I've heard the word, there's no housing for single people, right? This is kind of like a relatively new thing in the last year. I mean, that has been bubbling up to the point that it's being talked about a lot. And there's still, this data is really important, but it's already 4 or 5 years old. And like you said, we've done a lot of building in the last 4 or 5 years, and demographics are shifting always. So I think there's still this sweet spot of that, we need to have some pressure on, look, we need workforce housing. We need capital A affordable housing. And how to do that, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't want to just be too prescriptive, because I think, every couple of years it's going to shift, especially when things get built out. A need might be satisfied, and then the need shifts, So I really love, your Habitats and everybody else working in the sector. They know their clients, and they work with them closer than anybody else does, and so they know that, oh wow, we really need single family, or we need, single occupancy, or huge need for families, or so I just wanted to say that, that I think making sure that there is this flexibility is key, because this is long-term. And we can change it, right? Like PC, great, the PC said that, right? But that takes time and energy to change things, as we know, so as close as we can get here, it's great.
If we think about having the baseline of the 25%, and we put that out there up front, and then we use an incentive program to kind of steer the development towards these needed areas, these needed AMI ranges. And that incentive program could be, like we said, SDC waivers, maybe an expedited review, partial fee, or what have you. We can use those incentives for the developers to still give them flexibility, but also to let us kind of drive things towards where we really need, where our needs are more. So we have a higher bonus incentive for that area that we're missing quite a bit of housing
Yep.
here in the 50 to 80%. Let's give some more incentives for that area. I think that kind of hybrid model would help us with this.
And I think you had real early in this discussion, there was a model of credits. If you did this, you got so many, this was worth 2, and this was worth 1.5. And they tended to go in this direction on this chart. So the lower the income housing it was, the higher the credit you have. Well, maybe we need to flip it, is what I'm hearing. That's not what I heard you say, but that's kind of what popped in my head.
Yeah.
So that we really look at where's our greatest housing need right now. Our greatest housing need right now is in these upper 2 columns, 60-some%, maybe. We need to double check that number. And do we look at offering more incentive to do some of those? And look to our partners who specialized in sort of the 80% and down AMI, where there's federal funding and other funding in there. We don't shoot them in the foot, but maybe we did make it less of it instead of there and more of it instead of a park. This number really surprised me when I looked at it, how much it had changed. And the next question I have is, how do we do whatever that's going to be up there, and not bake it in so tight that a future council can't modify it without having to redo the whole annexation policy to reflect what the current conditions are?
Can we tie it to a report? You know, is there anything that comes out regularly, a trusted source that we can,
The state.
per the 2028 or every 5 years, just throwing that out there.
How often does ONA do
Yes.
the production targets?
That's what I was thinking.
Mhm.
Because their one from December is different than, obviously, our housing needs analysis by quite a bit.
Right. Yeah, it could be done every year, or I'm not sure how frequent they're gonna update that, but that's something that is a known entity out there that you could tie it to, that will always be there and continually updating itself.
Is that statewide, or is that, so that might not be a great.
But they do
Region.
focus on regions.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And they
So-
provide one specifically for Sisters.
And that way,
Oh,
we
okay.
don't, our magic ball, we don't bake something in that locks in household 8, 9, 10 years from now, or a developer who brings land in 10 years from now, let's just say it's a 20-year plan, into having to provide certain kinds of housing that are no longer needed.
Yeah.
I like that idea. I don't know how we do it, but if there's some way to start, this is where we're at, this is what we're gonna be doing, and we're gonna hold you to this. But when conditions change, this will change.
Well, didn't the annexation code refer to this document or this analysis that's updated on a certain amount of, I don't know, schedule?
But it could, if we're thinking that,
Or every 5 years, the council will reevaluate this particular piece, something like that.
just thinking if the city will be trying to find somebody, or the nonprofit developer gets it, they would, we'd want to tie it to them, right? We want to tie those requirements. It's not, if the developer itself, the market rate developer is not doing the development, it's less important to perhaps have that in the ordinance, because they're not going to be doing the development. They're not going to be doing the project. I'm just thinking out loud. We can certainly put it in there, but
They would kind of need to know spatially, right? If we need a whole bunch of single-family homes, that's more space than if we needed a bunch of multifamily. And they would kind of need to know how much land.
It's true, yeah, we need to make sure that if a developer's gonna deed the land, that they're deeding it of a sufficient size to be able to actually do the development later. So that's a whole nother conversation, is we might have to have some conceptual studies to prove that the land that they're giving is actually big enough to support the number of units. they
Well,
need.
and when you do master planning, this is kind of what I came back to earlier, it seems to me that if we want to have some of this scattered throughout the development rather than pockets, the only problem I have with deeding a chunk of land is now that chunk of land is your pocket of lower to middle income housing, and the rest of it isn't.
Well, that
So
doesn't.
you could try to have them designate lots in there that they would be looking to
Well,
do
yeah, I
something
mean, we could
like
say parcel or parcels,
that. Yeah.
right, like,
Yeah.
you know.
Just a thought in the back, if I don't bring these up, then I forget them and they're gone and my brain shuts down and then I say in the middle of the meeting and then I don't want to do that.
That's what they did in Woodlands.
Yes, exactly, and I like what they did in Woodlands. And like I said, I really like the fact that hearing that they actually have people coming and say, I want one of those built for me, so.
And Jordan, I'm sorry I cut you off earlier, did you have?
Oh, I was gonna mention the production targets from ONA. We can share that around too, but.
Is that annual that they do that, or is that?
That's a way to find out, I'm not sure.
I wouldn't want to tie it to something that's annual, because then that would be too much of a moving target for a builder.
Yeah.
I was thinking 5 years or.
Yeah,
Well, our sister's housing plan update was a forecast for, am I correct, Scott? This is a forecast for 20 years, or, is that right?
It's also pretty similar to the, yeah.
And updated, in last update 2022. So taking that into consideration, I don't know that every year we need to be reevaluating. But what determined that we updated this in 2022? And what would be the next Sisters Housing Plan update?
It's kind of dependent on when we want to have it updated. There's no requirement.
we did it for the UGB process.
That's what I was thinking.
And to update our existing housing plan that needed to be updated.
So is there some way to in here, tie it back to what we do external? It's kind of what I've heard being said. I like, I don't want to, we've had our hands tied to some degree by old annexation policy that people thought was pretty darn good 10, 15, 25 years ago. I might not be around in 25 years, but if I am, I don't want anybody to look at me and say, what the hell did you people do? If you know what I mean. I think that trying to make this as flexible as we can for the needs of the community as it changes makes a lot of sense to me. I just don't know how you do it within the legal stuff that you have to do. And this table is prescriptive, and maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe it needs to be more fluid. And I would love to hear, I don't think, we don't need an answer today, but I'd love to see just how smart of a guy you are. Now, just if we could just figure this out and find out, is there a way to do it?
It sounds like there's consensus to removing the table from the ordinance itself, but maybe there's a reference to some document that gets updated regularly that we can use as a resource when we need to.
At the time of annexation,
Or do we,
table XYZ will
do
be.
we leave it up to the nonprofit? The nonprofit, I mean, do we trust the nonprofit to address the need that is most acute in the community?
They're driven quite a bit by funding.
Yes, and that's the problem, is that the biggest need is an area that has the least funding. That's my concern, is that, I'm not real worried about those first three. I think they're gonna get built out. Some will take longer than others. And that some will be built out by people like our friends at Northwest Housing Alternatives. They've done a great job, and I'd love to see them do more. But they're not doing stuff down in that 120 to 150 AMI range
There'll be
because
funding for that.
there's no funding. And so they are dependent upon other structures to encourage builders to do it, and whether that's incentives or whether it's some sort of a change in how we do things, and to to try to get that built.
I wouldn't say that I'm not concerned about the bottom three sections. I think during this discussion and things, I'm realizing that we're going to need to look at those categories differently. And, you know, I mean, I'm wide open to like looking at code and seeing how can we, you know, provide density bonuses, that kind of stuff for workforce housing, or if we don't have it written correctly today, if we need to switch the percentages on some of the cottage clusters. I don't recall, you know, the max, that kind of stuff. And so I do see that there would be some different incentives we could look at for that, and I would love to think about that, your ideas, that kind of thing. But I mean, if we were going to go down the road, and I am just using this as an example, so please don't think this is where I'm going, but say we were going to waive SDCs for the 81 to 150, well, I'd probably want to still be waiving them for the lower as well. Like, I wouldn't want to go that far as to like financially incent the higher end and not the lower end. So, but I do think you're right, Councilor Ross, that we're going to need to look at those, the approaches to incent those differently. And
In my choice of words, I appreciate what you said. My choice of words of saying wasn't as important. Very important.
Oh, no.
I just think we have funding sources there, but I agree with what you're saying as well, that we.
Is there general consensus that you would like to see a provision that addresses workforce housing in addition to affordable housing? And it could be potentially packaged with some incentives to incentivize them to do that if they come back and say they can't pull it off without it. Is that something we should be exploring here in the next draft?
Is that something that should be in an annexation policy? How detailed?
I think so, because it's really hard to, or if not illegal to require at the time of development. I think this is our one shot to mandate that.
Yeah. I mean, I get the mandating part, just the incentive part.
Oh,
Like, I don't,
we don't have to define it
Yeah.
necessarily.
yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think.
I don't think so. I would have to have the complete package of incentives in place, other than I think they're going to want to hopefully see a commitment by the city to go in that direction, or to help us out with, do what we can to help them facilitate that housing.
And I do think that if I were a developer, if I were a builder of market rate homes, and this chart was in front of me, and I knew I had to build 20% or whatever I was going to build at 30% AMI or less, I'm looking at, I can't do that. But they might look at the 150 to 120 and say, yeah, maybe with a cluster development or with a townhome, I can make that work. And if we can incentivize them trying to get into some of the single family home type construction too, I mean, anything like that, I just think that I'm open to anything at this point in time based on these numbers. And I want quality builders to come into this community, the people you had at the table. Not that there aren't others. And as I've said to Jordan more than once, I just don't want to repeat what happened in one development in this community when I first moved here, and looked at building there, where everything was built out. And at the very last minute, the 5 least or 6 least desirable lots right up next to a bunch of industrial buildings were deeded to Habitat for low-income housing. That's not the model I want us to do. And that was what was allowed under the old code. And so that's probably why I got on this horse to begin with, to be honest with you. I just didn't feel fair. And I went to the open houses and to the grand openings of all of those. It was, people were happy to have homes, don't get me wrong, but it just sent the wrong message. And gated playgrounds.
You want to try to kind of summarize where we are at this point to make sure that
Yes,
we all.
please.
Please, all over the map.
So it sounds like we are in agreement that trying to require a developer to provide all these different categories is probably not going to happen. So recommend removing the requirement that they provide the the mix of units, that deeding land is a acceptable, it was in the code before, but that's an acceptable option. It could be provided to the city. What, I guess that's another topic we need to have discussion on is, do we want the city to be potentially the entity that acts as an intermediary between the free market developer, we're banking land, and then we're putting out RFPs to see if developers want to come and build on that. We choose one of them and they build within our requirements, a whole nother discussion. But we will still reference in some, well, if we take out the chart, there still will be some reference to the ONA requirements for different categories, so that that's in place and there's something that we can reference, and it's useful information. We'll keep that in there. It'll be updated often, as often as the state updates them. We will consider some flexibility on phasing. I heard that the phasing may be too late, halfway through the process, but that's at least that's a potential solution. The details still to be worked out. There's the whole question of if the land is deeded, if it is going to be required to be deeded for free. That's a subject to still investigate a little farther. Workforce housing is an important aspect that we want to make sure is required or facilitated in some manner. There's been some discussion about whether that happens organically or if it needs to be more prescriptive in there. And if we do require it, that we offer up some carrots or incentives to do so. Dr. Ned, okay here?
I've got a couple comments about like the deeding to the city. I mean, I would like that to be kind of a last resort. I mean, I don't know how you word that, but kind of like if you can't find another partner, I don't know how to do that. But I mean, adding that level of work to the city workload feels like a lot, unless it's necessary. I mean, I think we don't want to miss the opportunity. So that's on that topic. And then there's something else, but there's so many topics that I lost track. So I'm sure it'll come to me later. Thank you.
Removing the chart doesn't bother me. We still have to have those thoughts in the back of our head. But I'm looking at, I still think we list for now, I'd like to leave the 25% total mix of units in, but not define what the mix of units happens to be. So we may decide that number needs to be lower. We may decide numbers to be higher, but I think that leaving that in there for now makes me comfortable, but what's underneath it going away also makes me comfortable, as long as we have another way to reference and refer to that, and we're going to have this, we're not done with this yet, even though we'd like to be.
Well, we talked about if there's an alternative plan put forth, you need to have some benchmarks in order to evaluate it. Yeah, some references.
More work for you, I'm afraid.
And Scott, back to that recap that you just gave us. Councilor McDougall brought up the clustering topic, that we want to loosen that up a bit, because right now it's so prescriptive. I don't know if you said it. I didn't hear it.
I didn't.
Okay.
So that's a good one to add to the mix.
Not to really, well, I guess I will anyway. Do we need to consider, as a city, whether we want to relax some of our regulations on factory-built homes? I don't know.
I don't, that's actually, so I have a whole desk full of notes to self, and that I look at some of them, and that's actually a question. I've not looked at the code for that, and I would love to look at that, because I don't know what it is right now. I'm wide open there.
I know a lot of cities are looking in that direction to help with some of their housing issues, and it's not like it was 30 years ago in terms of you live in a neighborhood of manufactured homes, and it's quite pleasant. I mean, so I think that I may get run out of town with pickaxes and forks and flaming torches, but I think we need to consider that as we look where we want to go as we bring land in. Is there an opportunity for something like that? And even interscattered with stick-built and other types of housing.
Yeah, that's a great topic for
I don't know
another
why-
day.
Another topic for another day, but I read something in the Post about it today, and I thought, oh, that's right, that's been on my tip of my tongue for a while, and I knew Sarah had brought it up, and we hear about tiny homes on wheels and all these other things, but I really would like to kind of first take a look at the concept of something in the manufactured home area that resembles or looks like a stick-built home, which most of them do now, and it's a great way to reduce building costs, and may get it to some of that 50% AMI stuff too.
Yeah, and I know we touched on it a little bit, but I think my biggest concern or question is the deeding of land to another entity, whether it's us or others, of just, what are the metrics around that? You know, is it, it's gonna be 5% of all of your lands will be deeded to X, or is it, capacity of that land and build, if it's buildable and how many units can fit on it, you know, there's a few different metrics there, and I don't know if, I feel like there needs to be some definition of that.
I think the requirement of the 25%, for example, should still apply. If they're planning to deed the land to Habitat or sell it at a low rate, there's still an expectation of this 25% need being met. As long as we keep that there, then I think it addresses that, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, and that's master plan. And then I guess another question is, and I don't know if this is an annexation thing, but phasing as well. I know it's in there a little bit, but it's like, okay, if it's 4 phases, and, you know, do we want to be more prescriptive about, you know, some of these houses are going to be in all phases, or, and that's one way to spread them out. And I obviously understand that the challenge of spreading them out, because it's a lot cheaper if they're all next to each other, to have all your contractors in one spot and not running around all over the place. You know, there's economies of scale.
Could we tie it to acreage? In other words, if you're bringing in a small plot, I don't have an answer, just in the back of my mind when you mentioned that. If someone's bringing in 35, 40 acres and looking at a 6, 7 phase plan to deal with that, that's one set of issues. If somebody's bringing in, I don't know, pick a number, 10, I don't know, acres, maybe it's different, and I don't know how we would apply that, but I hear what you're saying, and the possibility of, I know some of the acreage that's being looked at is significant, that some that homeowners have. There's going to be big chunks coming in initially, and some of the others are going to come in bits and pieces. So I don't know, but the phasing thing to me is 50% seems a little high to me, but maybe it isn't.
Yeah, and I don't have a specific opinion, I'm just trying to think this out, you know, all the scenarios. Hopefully we have great working relationships with all of our builders, but sometimes some get creative.
We have a few.
Either way, if we turn it over to a nonprofit, and the phasing requirement is of the developer is only to give the land at a certain point, we don't have I guess we're at there's no end date on terms of when that nonprofit might be able to pull that off. Are we comfortable with that? You know, obviously they're committed to doing what they do, and they're probably under some timelines. Once they get their funding approved, they got to get it done in a certain period of time. But the way it's written only talks about the deeding of the land. It doesn't talk about when those units actually are delivered to people.
And I know this is not really part of this, but maybe it is. You know, I heard Peter very clearly say that certain types of deeding didn't work for them. Certain types of designation of the land had to be a certain way for their funding versus another. Are we going to be?
He does not like deed restricted.
That was the word. Yeah.
That is the term.
Are we going to be able to do that in such a way that we don't hamstring the partners we have in town that are providing a significant need to this community. Inadvertently. I know that that's not what we want to do. We just need to be sure, however, we word that in these pieces that we're covered.
Yeah, there's
Deed
definitely
restricted or
there
blight.
was one place that needs to be
I think I saw it.
updated in here that says deed restrictions, but I think there might be a different. So there's the developer transferring to the nonprofit is a different type of action than the nonprofit going to the buyer. So it's the nonprofit going to the buyer, I think, that can't have a deed restriction in our language, whereas I'm not sure if a developer deeds the land to Habitat, Habitat's going to own the land, and they are, so I think potentially, we should always check on it, but they could have a deed restriction on the land to Habitat, but then Habitat land leases out to the buyers. So,
We'd want to ask Peter more.
yeah, but there's
But
two
I did
different
remember that
transactions.
coming up in some discussion at some point, so.
Can we go back to the, giving it to the city or selling it to the city? Because you made a good comment. How is that not a conflict of interest? So do we even need to have it in there under the affordable housing part? I can understand deeding a parcel or some of the property to the city for a park, for example. But if it's going to potentially get us into trouble, or if a developer's thinking they can do that to meet their affordable housing need, to sell it to the city, I don't know that I want that option in there, unless I'm missing some benefit in having it in there. I just don't, especially if there's going to be a
Gives
potential.
you more direct control. I mean,
Gives us what?
gives you more direct control, of who is, like we did with the ARPA money. You solicit proposals, you could choose, if you want to just target workforce housing developers versus, affordable housing nonprofits, tailor those incentives to those type of developers. You know what I mean? Like a little bit more control over how does that look, feel, built, because now you're the landowner.
So we might have more opportunity than a developer would to just directly do that on their own.
Well, I mean, potential. I mean, if they're seeking a partner to build affordable housing, they're going to build to our development code standards and everything. But who they select and how they select that, is up to them, as opposed to the council would be able to say, we like Northwest Housing, we're going to pick them to do this 50 unit.
Yeah, we've vetted them and,
Yeah,
If we owned the property, the city was deeded the property. And a developer came in, whoever it is looking to build in one of the lower AMI classifications, and they have to have match. The value of the land that the city would give them to put it on could be used as part of that match, could it not? Just like it is when we do other sorts of land things, like the match on the roundabout was property we provided. I mean, is there?
You just sell it to them for $1, and that.
My point is the value of the land. Let's say the property's worth X for what they want to do. Is that an advantage to us to have that in our suitcase as an incentive to a developer that we can provide you with the match you need for the federal government by the city providing this value of the property? I don't know. Just, it popped in my head, which is dangerous of me.
Have to ask that.
I think, as we said, it's like one of those last resort options of
Yeah.
we prefer you to build it. If you can't, find someone to build it. If you can't, give it to a, affordable housing developer. If you can't do any of that, we'll take it and we'll figure it out, to achieve our goals.
Yeah,
Legal counsel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
because there could be situations where, and I know this came up somewhere in the verbiage of just legal, hurdles for some organizations to be able to accept land or gifts from different, we could be also the intermediary, right? It might be easier just to give it to the city, knowing the city's just gonna turn around and give it to somebody else. I don't know, but it just, I don't wanna take it off the list, but I agree that it should be down the list for sure.
wondering too, you mentioned the concept of annexation requiring land being given to the city is illegally, very odd. The reality is that the annexation process happens. The land is there, the developer has a percentage they have to do something with, but they haven't platted it necessarily at that point in time. It would seem to me that it would be at the platting stages where that land might be identified to go to the land bank, whatever we want to call that. And would that not help remove some of the concept of annexation is dependent upon a gift to the city?
I mean, it's probably no different than parkland. Like, you
Yeah,
see
that's
that
what I'm
happen all
thinking.
the time.
That's going in my
Dedicate
mind.
parkland to the
Yep.
city, boom, you're at, yeah, it's part of the.
Or school property?
I don't see it as any, as far as I know, I don't see it as any different than.
Okay,
than
good.
providing
It makes me
land
comfortable.
To the city for housing.
Okay.
Again, I think it's, sorry, it's how it's worded too, right? Remember, annexation is an agreement that you're negotiating, it's not saying you have to give us land in order to annex, but
Exactly.
it's an option that we can negotiate as part of this deal.
Exactly. That was what in the back of my head was too, but then I heard the comment very early on and
Well, that's the feedback.
it raised a little red
That's
flag.
the feedback we got from one of the developers.
There you go.
We can structure it.
Fine.
Annexation is something we have a little more freedom to.
And I will say, listening to that, when the developers, the most we could probably do is 5%, I thought. You know, I mean, they have a different set of filters that they look at things with, and that's fine, I have no problem with it. I want to leave the 25 in there for now, and then we go from there.
And I want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a corner, that there could also be some sort of land exchange opportunity as well, like if a builder, developer, something, you know, owned or had access to land in another part of the city, that could also satisfy the requirement to, yeah, I don't want to
I
just,
think that's what the alternative plan is designed to address.
okay, I just want to make sure that that's,
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to make sure that
That's a
we're
good
not
point.
being
I hadn't thought of that, but you're
too
right.
prescriptive. This might be, yeah, some housing
As long
might
as
be,
we read our housing goal, who cares if
I
it's
don't care, yeah,
on Hugh Street or R Street?
care a little bit where it is, but.
We have about 23 minutes left. I didn't know if you wanted to address some of the other provisions in the ordinance.
Just one quick thing that maybe we put on some back burner somewhere, but during one conversation, it might have been the one you and I had with Lynn McConnell from the Housing Works, yeah, I can only think of HUD, thank you. And I was just listening to our conversation here and thinking, wow, we have some great partners, we really like working with them, and there's probably some people out there we'd probably rather not work with, but we can't prescribe that. However, she suggested having a list of potential partners available. I think other cities have done it, like kind of preferred partners, like, you know, preferred nonprofit partners, maybe people we've worked with before, as a list that a developer might refer to as like, oh, let me look at those first, or, you know, like, we can't prescribe it, but it was, anyway.
Sorry, I'm not following.
Okay, so somewhere this would not be in the annexation policy, but as, say, a developer came in here who's not familiar with the landscape, and they're like, oh, okay, so now I need to find me a nonprofit developer who's gonna build some of this out for me, having a list available of people that we've worked with before, I mean, or we could just do it word of mouth, but it seemed a way to kind of guide in a specific direction toward, like, these partners that we have entrusted our work to before. And I'd have to go back to.
It's a little bit of a slippery thing. We get asked for recommendations, like people come in, hey, they didn't realize they're gonna need an engineer or something like that to complete a project. Do you know any good engineers that we should be looking at? And we kind of refrain from doing that because we don't wanna recommend, even if it's a couple, you know, at the expense of potentially some other ones that could also do the work that we didn't mention. So we it's gotta be careful, unless it's an exhaustive list, is exhaustive of a list of potential.
I'll go back to my notes, how about that, and see exactly what it was.
The back of my mind, when you were saying that, makes a lot of sense, is that we could get around the you're not on the list aspect by basically putting out an open call, we're building a list of affordable housing developers that we will provide to builders as part of a new expansion, would you like to be included on the list? And then have certain requirements that provided, we just make a shopping list. If you're not on it, well, we send it out. You know, we're not picking anybody preferential. These are developers who work in the Sisters community and know the area. I don't know.
I'll look and see what she was referring to. I don't have that available right now.
Not that big of a community, probably, when you get down to it.
I was thinking how happy I was I didn't live in Camas, Washington this morning.
At least if you kind of cap it to just ones in the region.
Yeah, I'll see if it seems like it would be along the idea of like picking two engineers that, you know, are you know, cousins to someone that works here. I'm kidding. You know, I'll make, if it's a viable suggestion, I'll send it on and we can talk about it later.
Do you have some feedback or input on outside of the affordable housing section?
Okay.
If nobody else has any more affordable housing topics. All right. I would like to suggest under the section of submittal requirements, 4.10.500, it states the application must include the following materials with their annexation request, and we have a list there. Considering the high risk of wildfire in our area, I would propose that we also require a wildfire resiliency plan to be submitted by the applicant that would identify the evacuation routes, defensible space, emergency vehicle access, fire flow, etc., as part of their package.
Required with the defensible space subdivision master plan process.
I think it's already,
Not the evacuation routes at that level of detail, but certainly compliance with.
Yeah, some things are covered with our building code.
Yep.
Some things are not. So for those
Yeah.
items that aren't, I mean, even if they just said in this plan that we'll follow or we recognize that the City of Sisters Development Code requirements for defensible space, we recognize that. But these other things, I think are really important with the location of where they might be building in terms of evacuation and emergency vehicle access and all that stuff.
yeah, that's a fire, it is, a lot of that's in the defensible space code, that I recall. I mean, are you remembering that, including apparatus access, and I don't, not to the detail of, I don't think evacuation routes, because that's a little bit of a moving target, but I think most of that was in there.
I do recall that this is.
When it's a master plan, like.
That there has to be a review of the space by someone on the fire team to be able to make sure that they can move apparatus. Like that's a part of the process. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think we do have that already in there. Because I remember some discussion about one of the Habitat large groupings at a planning commission meeting. I mean, it's been a few years, but.
Fire code, that, regulates access for emergency equipment.
When does that happen in the process? When would that happen in the process of annexation? I just want to make sure we're not going to approve an annexation. And I believe I read that in here, that approval of annexation does not mean approval of master plan development. We're trying to have them coincide.
Correct, yes.
So I would just want to make sure that we're not approving an annexation if those things have not been addressed. And if it's somehow in there somewhere, I'm okay with that.
Certainly would as it stands now, would be required to comply with the defensible space standards at that time. If we wanna enhance that or add requirements, then we would have to create that or amend the code basically, or somehow negotiate it as part of the annexation agreement. We have talked about this has come up in regards to the planning for the area in general, and some of those concepts should be discussed and addressed in the area plan process. There's been some talk about, utilizing some buffers between the edge of development and the wildland area. I think we've had some comments that have been brought up in meetings, and I think that's an ideal time to address that is in the area plan. That can, out of that process, can recommend changes to the code to bring that vision to bear. This is assuming that we'll have some time to get the area plan process done before somebody petitions for annexation, right? That area plan process is like a 6-month process, and that might have some recommendations for some code amendments that will take even longer than that to get done. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that those are perfect discussion items for the area plan process. We could certainly, as a kind of a belt and suspenders, add some additional language in the annexation plan should somebody want to annex before we get through the whole area plan and before we can update the code. It's possible we can enhance what we have in here. So similar to what you are recommending in our submittal requirements, we can, since we have this open right now, right? We could certainly add some of that language in here and beef up those requirements if we feel like we need to.
Can you just, I'm trying to make sure I understand, like, the relationship between the master plan and annexation is in this part of the conversation. Is there something written somewhere, and I may have read it and forgotten, that does say that, like the annexation agreement can't be signed up until the master plan has been approved, even if it's like 5 minutes later kind of thing? I mean, we have that provision somewhere to make sure that we're coinciding the two?
It's going to take, as I mentioned earlier, with reference to the master plan section currently does not go to council. So there are going to have to be some amendments to address that. And then the timing of those can be also addressed
Okay.
to make sure that
the code
the
change.
master plan is a requirement at the time of annexation.
And I'm not trying to be uber pushy, but when will that code happen? Mostly because I definitely feel, I think we all feel in this room, this time crunch, right? And you most of all, of
Yeah.
all this, right?
Yeah.
I think Scott's thinking if we would just finish this annexation thing, get a lot more free
Sorry.
time.
UGB at that, free up some time as well. Those are things that need to happen, and I don't know if I can answer your question right this moment, but you identified some critical paths that need to be addressed and will need to be addressed.
I didn't mean to divert us from this conversation. I was trying to understand with what Councilor Pellerin was saying, like, how tied are they? And they're not quite tied yet. But
they're not tied currently in our plan.
Thank you.
But ideally, we would go through this area plan process and plan the area out and identify all the things that need to be amended in our code to make it happen. And those are action items that are further work beyond the area plan that would ideally be done before we get anybody wanting to annex.
Forgive me for having to step out and miss a little bit of this, but trinkets and things, and based on some discussions I had with Jordan and looking at the Spokane fires and how close we came in this latest iteration, where would it happen? And I may be way off base with this question. If we wanted to rethink maybe we talked about buffers earlier, how we ensure that the parts of the UGB that come in that create that buffer between the rest of the community and Indian Ford Meadows and that sort of thing, the sort of the fire avenues. If we wanted to look at different kinds of housing space on the outer perimeter of the developments that would go in, as well as how the streets would go in, and how the buffers would be, is that an area planning process thing? Or is that something that actually happens at the plating level, or is it both? So, because I think that we've learned a couple of lessons, whether we want to learn them or not as a community, about our vulnerability to fire. And this last one certainly illustrated that. And we have parts of our exterior community, as well as our community, that abut up to and would be the path for which fire could move into our community. And they're there, we can't do anything about it, but we do have the ability with this to try to design at least the way that the outer perimeter. I mean, if we want higher density, we kind of have it towards the middle and lower density towards the outside, so we have an ability for our firefighter professionals to get in there and be able to stop the fire, or try to stop the fire at the border of the community. Instead of what happened in Spokane, where it got into one house, and then we saw that, and that could be us. And so I just want to be sure that whatever we do out there, we keep our community safe, and we keep the people that live there safe, and we try to give our firefighters, our firefighter professionals, an honest chance to fix this. And you know more than I do, don't get me wrong, but I think we can do some things with community design beyond just having buildings move, but maybe trying to create a little bit better buffer on that outer perimeter.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the conversation needs to happen. It's a pretty complicated one.
I know.
Yeah, I think to Cheryl's point, is it worth, even though I feel like a lot what she was asking is in the code already, but I saw under this section, like number 5, it says a narrative which addresses the approval criteria and SDC, yada, yada, and any other applicable requirements. Would it behoove us to just add another line in there, like, just, by the way, just remember that you have to address this special code, and I mean, in theory, they're reading through all of our code, but would that satisfy the requirement of just in the section referring to our fire code, Cheryl?
Where were you talking
Well,
about?
that same section, the submittal requirements.
Oh, thank you. I was on the wrong page.
So if you look at number 5, it's saying
Yeah.
a narrative which addresses SDC number. Would it be good to have number 6, a narrative which addresses SDC, yada, yada, about fire requirements, which is already kind of required, but it's just more of a reminder.
It kind of signifies the importance of
We
this.
we put it in there because we think it's necessary.
Yeah.
It would probably be worth having until we tie, at the very least, until we tie the master planning to the annexation agreement, because master planning is where we do like the fire review whole plan, and if we don't have them tied together, that adding that to the annexation policy gives us a little bit more teeth with the fire piece.
So the review procedures in the proposed annexation policy do require the approval concurrently with the master plan. It's that our master plan code in the SDC right now doesn't tie back to council approval of annexations, right? So that's the piece that we need. But
Okay,
at the
so-
time of the annexation approval, you'll be also considering the master plan, and the master plan does require the fire control plan.
Fire control plan, is that what you just said?
Yeah, as part of our defensible space code, any subdivision, master plan, site plan review requires the fire prevention and control plan, which has to be vetted by the fire marshal.
Okay, so I think you just made, so the annexation does require the master plan at the same time. I'm just not remembering that, and I appreciate that, Jordan.
Yeah, it's, 4.1.300. Master plan approval is required concurrent with annexation unless exempted. And the exemptions are public schools and city-initiated annexations.
Small lots. Oh, no, wait, that was something else.
Public schools on lots, yeah. That one tricked me
Better
too the
place,
other day.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's coupled here,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not
Yeah, I
coupled
think
on
we
the
just
other
need
side.
to, amend the master plan section in terms of process and maybe what we are asking it to do. I think it might require a little bit amending to make sure that it requires the information that we need to evaluate it relative to an area plan, that it provides enough detail. I think what our master plan currently does is, you know, it's set up to do something different. So we want to make sure that it really meets what we need it to do here.
All right, we got 5 more minutes if we want to stick to time, just doing time check, so. Did we answer any of your questions, or did we just create more work for you?
Well, I think like I said, each time, you know, we're not ready to set it up for, start scheduling adoption hearings, but I think each time we do this, we're bringing it a little bit more into focus in terms of what you want to see out of it. You know, one thing I hesitate to bring up with 4 minutes left, but the current draft does not have any requirement for commercial annexations. At one time, we talked about whether or not they needed to provide or be responsible. Obviously, they're not building housing. And would there be a different way for those types of properties to address their affordable housing requirements? You heard some feedback, I think, from the developers when they were sitting in this room about some of their concerns with it. But I'm not sure council has taken a position on whether they want to see that still included or they want to punt it to a different later times. You know, if it's a construction excise tax, that's something we don't want to tie to this particular ordinance to potentially weigh it down a little bit and keep the momentum going. Is that something you want to circle back to later? 3 minutes, you got to discuss. 3 minutes to discuss this.
I never thought we were going to talk, we did, I know, very briefly talked about the construction excise tax, which I didn't think of as part of this document. And so if that was ever to be discussed, this is where it sat in my mind with that would be a different topic. And I don't recall talking, and I would love to hear if somebody else thought that we were going to tie any of the affordable housing to commercial. I don't recall that we were going to do that.
The only scenario I can think of is if somebody wanted to bring in 25 acres and it was like, it's all light industrial, right? Maybe zone that way in the area plan, all that kind of stuff. Do they have any skin in the game or onus to help out with affordable housing in general? I think, is that kind of the question?
That's the question as arguments, if they would be creating the need, was there some mechanism, and that's, I think, where the CET came up as a possible strategy, but I think there were other discussions as well. I don't quite recall it. But I do remember we had some discussions about it, and I don't think we've ever taken it very far from there.
And the builders, what was their feedback? Because I'm not remembering.
I thought it was kind of counterproductive, at least one of them, to trying to get employers in here that might pay wages that might help you afford housing. Mm-hmm. And it was, in their mind, it was a little bit counterintuitive to that. But that was just one opinion.
Well, it'd be fine if people were going to pay, a living wage, then that would be one thing, but we don't seem to be getting in a lot of industry that pays higher wages. So maybe it is a topic to at least put in our noggins.
You're talking about annexations that only are proposed in commercial, like no residential, right?
Building housing.
Yeah, no housing at all, including mixed use. Because mixed use would still, for that residential portion.
For the commercial portion, yeah. Mixed use, theoretically, it would be required to provide it for housing.
Right.
Which might scare off people doing mixed use. If they're, suddenly they're into the world of affordability requirements and stuff, but I know sometimes mixed use is actually can fall into affordable housing anyway, so.
I think that in my recall of that sitting on Zoom is that topic came up, there was some discussion, and somehow CET came into it. And that's when there started to be some negativity about the concept of construction excise tax. I think that the term made them think, well, maybe that's gonna apply to all construction, and, you know, we just don't need to see that, or maybe they thought, you know, whatever, or they were looking at maybe selling some of the land to potential industrial developers, but I don't think we gave up on the idea, but I'm not sure that the CET is the mechanism, maybe another mechanism as well. But I'm also thinking we need to get this cleaned up and then think about that.
On that topic, where the section 4.10.700, affordable and workforce housing requirements, it reads, annexations involving lands zoned or to be zoned shall meet the following. Housing.
Supposed to say residential.
It should say residential, right? So that we're making it clear, and we might have to also clarify if mixed use is considered or not. And I remember the discussion on CET, it was with our partners we had in that workshop, Brooks Resources and so forth. And one of the comments was that there's not a lot of profit in commercial development.
That's right.
And we want to make sure we're balancing kind of the benefit that they're bringing to our community in terms of jobs against what benefit we might be losing if they're not contributing towards affordable housing. So we have to balance that a bit.
That was it, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we're a little bit after 3.
You're right.
Does anybody have any other questions, or do you have any questions for us?
I have a comment. I think it's been very productive. I really appreciate hearing what the 3 of you have to say. Help me clarify some of my thoughts and judgment, so thank you.
Yeah.
And for the work too.
And again, thank you to the builders that have been taking their time to talk with us as well. That's, you know, time is money. So appreciate that.
Thank you for all the comments, and we'll try to digest this and come back with another draft. Hopefully,
Yeah.
falling down the issues to kind of the, you know, lessons learned, I guess.
Yeah.
And we can workshop it as much as we need to.
Coming soon to another Wednesday near you.
Yeah.
We'll get it right, as right as we can,
Yeah.
knowing that we can always amend it if we need to.
Yeah. But we do need to get it completed sooner than later, so.
Interesting stuff.
All right.
We'll charge other communities for copying it.
Yes.
No joke.
Yeah.
Big money.
All right.
Seems like we're pioneering this a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, I adjourn this meeting.
That's the sister's way, right?
Where's Michael when you need him?